I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I didn't send a single angry text. I simply opened a laptop, logged into a bank account, and canceled everything. In less than 4 minutes, I dismantled 40 years of generosity, not out of rage, not out of spite, but because of 3 words my daughter-in-law said across a dinner table that made my wife bend down and wipe a counter she was never asked to clean. This is the night I decided. Some debts are not financial, some are moral, and when those go unpaid long enough, the creditor stops being silent. Stay with me, because this story doesn't end where you think it does. My son Ryan called it a strategic evening, a business dinner, an investor flying in from California, someone who could accelerate his career into a different orbit. My daughter-in-law, Tiffany, organized it the way generals plan operations. Every detail calculated, every surface curated. Their home in the Austin suburbs was worth over $1 million. A number I knew precisely, because my name was still on the mortgage paperwork. The house looked immaculate that night. White walls, ambient lighting, no family photographs, no evidence of time. No indication that 2 elderly parents had once contributed the foundation beneath every room. The message was architectural: you are welcome here, as long as you remain invisible. My wife Susan arrived late. She had spent the afternoon volunteering at a community garden, a senior outreach program she had quietly dedicated herself to for years. Her shoes still carried dried earth. Her hands smelled of soil. She apologized the moment she walked through the door, as if her very presence required an explanation. Studies show that elderly parents who feel socially marginalized within their own family circles experience cortisol spikes equivalent to those triggered by workplace bullying. Susan didn't know that statistic. She just knew how that room felt when every set of eyes registered her the same way, as background. Tiffany told her she could stay, no need to change. Her voice was light, polished, precise. The way someone straightens a decorative pillow they didn't actually want touched in the first place. Dinner unfolded exactly as Tiffany had choreographed. Wine was poured, the correct labels. Dishes were announced by their French names. The conversation circled around personal brands, digital audiences, investment portfolios. I listened more than I spoke. Ryan performed confidence, Tiffany conducted the room, and Susan, quietly without being asked, stood up and began clearing the plates. She did it the way she had done everything her entire life. Not because someone ordered her to, but because she saw something that needed doing, and she did it. 40 years of marriage, and I still found that quality extraordinary. That's when the investor glanced over, nodded in Susan's direction, and asked casually, "Who is she?" Tiffany smiled. Not dramatically, not viciously, just enough. And she answered with a phrase, a single, casual, perfectly constructed phrase that reclassified my wife from a person into a function, into something that existed only to keep surfaces clean and corners tidy. The room went quiet. No one laughed. No one objected. I turned to Ryan. I needed nothing grand from him. A frown, a redirect, one single syllable of disagreement. Anything. Ryan smiled, nodded slightly, then pivoted the conversation toward interest rates. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I watched Susan bend back down over the table, still wiping, still silent, and I understood something that took my breath away. She wasn't being passive. She was protecting Ryan, protecting the evening, protecting a peace she had been trained to preserve even at the cost of herself. That night on the drive home, we were both silent. That silence wasn't empty. It was enormous. When we got home, Susan stayed in the bathroom for a long time. When she came out, she said she'd dropped the soap. Her eyes were red. I didn't ask anything further. 67 years of living had taught me that certain questions only deepen wounds that need space to close. That night, lying awake, I didn't just think about the dinner. I thought about every paper I had ever signed on Ryan's behalf, every business debt I had quietly absorbed, every postponed medical appointment, and there had been several, because money I had set aside for my own care had been rerouted to patch my son's failures before he even knew they were failing. Research on financial exploitation within families reveals that parents over 60 are 4 times more likely than any other demographic to silently subsidize adult children, not through manipulation but through love that was never allowed to have limits. Near 4 a.m., I heard Susan crying, not sobbing, softer than that. The sound of someone using every muscle they have to not fall apart. I sat up, and in that moment something crystallized. Remaining silent any longer would not be restraint. It would be participation. I made one decision, clean, cold, irreversible, not to punish anyone, but to end a story that had been told wrong for far too long. The next morning, I told Susan to pack lightly. She didn't ask why. 40 years together meant she recognized the particular stillness in my voice that indicated the time for debate had passed. We left Austin at 5 a.m. I drove to an apartment downtown, a property I had purchased years earlier during my traveling years, a decision I had never mentioned to Ryan. When Susan stepped off the elevator and saw it, she didn't ask how long we were staying. She asked until when. I said, until things are clear. She sat down, placed her hands on her knees, and exhaled the deep, long exhale of someone who had finally been granted permission to be exhausted. I opened my laptop. I logged into the account. I canceled the automatic mortgage payments, one by one. No hesitation, no shaking hands. I changed the access passwords not to punish, but to re-establish a boundary that should never have dissolved. I saved every confirmation. Then I closed the laptop and sat very still. There was no victory in that moment, only the sensation of something being restored to its correct position. That afternoon, I called my attorney. The man had handled my legal affairs for nearly 2 decades. I activated a clause embedded in our financial agreement with Ryan, a safeguard written in precisely for this contingency and never used. My attorney asked once if I was certain. I told him I had never been more certain of anything in my adult life. He said he would prepare the paperwork. His voice wasn't surprised, just careful. Because men like him understand that decisions like this don't come from a single bad evening. They come from years of accumulated evidence that the person you're protecting has confused your protection for permission. 3 days later, Ryan called. His voice came through rushed, destabilized. He said the bank was flagging the account. He said things were falling apart. He asked what I had done. I told him I had stopped. He called it destruction, said I was dismantling his life. I let him speak until there was nothing left to say. Then I told him I understood the consequences perfectly because I had been carrying them alone for years. I ended the call. Ryan and Tiffany arrived the following day. Tiffany with her practiced composure, Ryan with the expression of a man confronting something he had never been trained to face. I let them inside. I didn't offer warmth. I didn't manufacture coldness. I was simply accurate. When Tiffany called that dinner a slip of the tongue, I pointed to Susan. I said there are tears that no late apology can reverse. Then I placed 2 items on the table: Susan's worn medical notebook, containing my own postponed health records, and the legal folders from my attorney. I didn't explain every page. I didn't need to. I only said the price of that joke was not a bruised feeling. It was the entire foundation they had been standing on. Tiffany accused me of weaponizing money. I told her I had used money as a shield for them, so long that I had forgotten to use it as a resource for myself, and for the woman beside me. Then I placed the final document on the table, the house sale authorization, 30 days, no negotiation, no revision. They left without saying goodbye. Weeks later, I drove alone to Asheville, North Carolina, deep into the mountains to find my older brother Arthur. We hadn't spoken in 20 years. A family fracture neither of us had found the courage to repair. When I arrived, he was outside working with his hands. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he simply nodded, as if he'd expected me eventually. That afternoon, Arthur told me something that stopped my breath entirely. 10 years earlier, when Ryan had fallen into serious business debt, the kind that could have sent him into bankruptcy, Arthur had quietly paid off the majority of it. He never told me. He knew I would have refused. He knew I would have sacrificed something critical to handle it myself. He wanted to make sure I didn't choose between my son and my health. I sat there on that porch and thought about every medical appointment I had postponed, every quiet ache I had dismissed, and I realized I had never actually been carrying the weight alone. Someone had been standing behind me, invisible, preventing the collapse I never saw coming. Arthur had built something on his land, a workshop, a gathering space for craftspeople, artists, and retired individuals who needed somewhere to create with their hands. He asked if Susan and I would consider becoming partners in expanding it, not as guests, as architects of something real. When I told Susan, she didn't respond immediately. She sat with her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea. Then she asked one question: "Does Arthur have a garden?" I nodded. She smiled, and for the first time in weeks, her eyes were unguarded. "We moved to Asheville. We built something. We called it the Miller Workshop, not to brand it, but to remind ourselves that everything here was made by human hands, with honest time and mutual respect." Susan planted seeds. I shared what I had learned across a lifetime: discipline, boundaries, the cost of trading integrity for comfort, and how to recognize when your silence has become someone else's permission. I sent Ryan one final check, 3 months of rent, nothing more, along with a single handwritten line: "This is the last time, from here you carry your own weight." He never replied. Some lessons cannot be delivered through words. They only arrive when there is no one left to break your fall. They called my wife the cleaner. They only ever saw the dust. They never saw the seeds. If this story made you think about the cost of silence, about what we normalize inside the people we love, tap like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the most dangerous betrayals don't arrive with noise. They arrive with a smile at a dinner table in a house you paid for, while someone quietly wipes the counter and says nothing.